One second.
Yeah, we can see your screen, Raghu. Please
Hope
go
all,
ahead.
yeah, all of you can hear me.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So good morning. So I will briefly introduce what we call geotechnical engineering. Earlier we used to call it as soil mechanics and foundation engineering. But nowadays we renamed it as geotechnical engineering. So under the broad area of geotechnical engineering, but for the different kind of audience, I will titled my talk as Basics of Foundations for Structures. Okay. So basically, whenever you want to construct any structure, generally people tend to consult an architect. So the architect, you will define what are the your functional requirements, and in turn he will make a kind of sketch, and then consult a structural engineer to design the structure. And then for the structure, whatever is designed by the structural engineer, there should be a geotechnical engineer to design the foundations, because designing of the foundations is basically covered by geotechnical engineers. But these days what happens, no, these structural engineers will kind of make some approximations and try to design themselves without consulting geotechnical engineer. Basically they think it's additional expenditure, but it is not so. If you see long term benefits, consulting a geotechnical engineer before actual construction is better than subsequently, if there is some problem, then consulting a geotechnical engineer. But usually we see that very few people will consult a geotechnical engineering in advance, and generally they consult only after they encounter some problem. So if we see how the civilizations are formed, earlier civilizations used to be on the river banks so that they have adequate quantity of water and they can survive better. And subsequently, because of the trade connections necessitated to build these habitats on seashores so that they can transport commodities. So both of those times they had options to choose where to settle kind of things. But now with increasing population and industrialization, there is a demand to construct the structures at any place under any given soil and ground conditions. So soil mechanics started only in 1920s, 30s. So there were some earlier theories were in place. The subject of soil mechanics and foundationing emerged with a book on soil mechanics by one person called Carl Telzagi. He is a Czech mechanical engineer. He started this subject 1925 formally, and he is referred as father of soil mechanics. So he has written a book called Theoretical Soil Mechanics, published in 1943. So this we can say is the first publication in the field of soil mechanics, and of course subsequently there are several such textbooks and several such theories have come up. So if you see, when we say structures, so buildings, roads, bridges, dams, all are these are structures. So most of these structures are founded on soil or ground. So we need some kind of knowledge of soil mechanics to design them. Of course, you have structures like aeroplane and ships. Though aeroplane flies in the air and ship moves in the water, but they have to be constructed on ground. So during that time also you need some kind of soil mechanics knowledge, know how to manufacture that heavy structures and then subsequently shift to air and water. So as I said, almost all the structures are built in on ground with soil or sometimes with soil only. So if you see the comparison of materials of construction, you have soil, concrete and steel. So the distinct difference between soil and steel is concrete and steel are manufactured materials with a set properties. So we are sure of those properties, whereas soil is a natural material and it occurs in different places in different conditions. So it's a natural material. So you have to make a lot of approximations, estimations when compared to steel and concrete. So for steel and concrete, we have set IS codes like we have IS 456 and I have IS 800. So those will give you complete information about the material properties as well as how to go about the design. But soil, it is not so. It is in the being a natural material, it has varied conditions. So particularly when you come to soil, it is a material soil, and it is what soil is. Soil is consists of ground. So ground is a state. So soil is the material here and ground is the state. So material may have certain properties, but the state is important. Like ground, it is in which state? It is at what level of the ground, and what is the water content, and what is the groundwater table relation to that. So it varies, exist in different states of the ground. So that's why it is very important to study this, particularly when you want to design structures at different ground conditions. So basically soil is formed by disintegration of rocks. So we have different types of rocks, like igneous rocks, metamorphic rocks, sedimentary rocks, and the chemical composition. So different chemical compositions of rocks, and under different climatic conditions, they disintegrate in different ways. Like there is mechanical disintegration, physical disintegration, chemical disintegration. Because of that, soils are formed. So we have different types of soils. So this color of the soil will depend on the minerals present. For example, if it contains iron, it is in red in color. And during the disintegration, what are the different types of parameters which will govern this disintegration are temperature, humidity, rainfall, drainage. So if there is a high temperature, low temperature, like we have in Himalayas, we have always sub-zero temperatures. But in the southern India, we have very high temperatures. So this temperature also will affect type of the disintegration takes place in rocks, and then the formation of different types of soils. Humidity also will affect, like coastal areas will have high humidity, and rainfall. Some areas have very high rainfall and very low rainfall, and then drainage conditions. So whenever there is rainfall, this water has to seep through or it has to flow as a surface runoff. So depending on the drainage conditions, the color of the soil may change, like black color will get due to poor drainage. So basically soil is classified as different size fraction. So gravel, sand, silt, clay. So these are the designations given based on their size. Like if the size is more than 300 millimeters, we call it as boulder. And if it is between 300 to 80, we will call it as cobble. And if it is 80 to 4.75 mm size, we call it as gravel. And sand is from 4.75 to 0.075 millimeters, that is 75 microns. And 75 microns to 2 microns, we call it as silt. And below 2 microns, we call it as clay. So generally we say no sand, gravel. Gravel means it's a material, but which is based on the fraction only. So if you see, as you go from boulder to clay, the size is decreasing. And in the sand, mostly you have silica, okay? And silt also silica, but clay has different types of materials. So these materials, when minerals, these are called minerals. So these minerals, when they interact with water, they have varied properties. So those properties are very important for us with respect to construction of structures. So we can find out these fractions using these type of sieves. So for example, here, if you see different types of materials are there, this is gravel, then cobbles, and then sand, silt, clay. So these are the materials. You can separate them by using different types, sizes of the sieves, and then get into some classification methods. So if you see, you can see here different types of soils occurred in different conditions. As I said, different humidity and those conditions, and even size, shape, everything varies in colors also. So if you see, based on the formation, we have due to physical and chemical weathering, and then we have organic origin. So where there is a lot of organic content, like if you get some clay samples from the shores, seashores. Okay, so because of the physical weathering, parents rocks are caused by impact of gradation of action of water, wind, ice, etc. So which naturally will form into sizes fractions of gravels and sands. And chemical weathering will lead to clay and silt contents. So the soils, no, though there is weathering of parent rocks, so there can be two types of soils. One is transported soil, other is residual soil. So residual soil meaning that weathering action taken place where the rock is present, and soil also formed in the same place. But there will be different types of soils like transported soils. So we have different types of transport agents, like water we call alluvial deposit. If it is by wind, we call aeolian deposit. And if it is transported by ice, we call glacial deposits. And if it is in fresh water, we call it as lacustrine deposit. And if it is through seawater or saline water, we call it as marine deposits. So there are different types of transported soils and residual soils in different places on the earth. Then if you see, the most important fraction of the soil gradation is clay. So the clay contains three main minerals which are called as kaolinite, mica, and smectite. So in these kaolinite and mica are basically called as kaolinite. So there are non-expanding type. So suppose if you take some fraction of the clay and mix it with water, so there is no expansion. But if you take spectite or bentonite or montmorillonite, what is popularly called as, so when water is added to that, there will be expansion. And when you remove the water by heating with the temperature, then again it will contract. So this expansion and contraction behavior is very important when you want to design structures on these type of soils. For example, here if you see, when the sample is wet, this is the shape of this, and as it dries, you see there are cracks developed. This you can see in some places like tank beds. When the tank bed dries up, you see this kind of thing. So this is there is called what is called as shrinkage. Okay. So we can also test this in the laboratory by filling a cup of soil with water and then allow it to dry. So here you can see the shrunken portion of this. So whenever this clay interacts with water, there is either swelling or shrinkage due to seasonal variations. So this is the most important factor you have to find out. So soil basically, if you see, we call it as a three-phase system because we have soil solids, then we have water, and some portion of that is air. So by considering the weight and the volume of each of these proportions of that, we will calculate so many parameters like moisture content. So how much water is present in the soil, that is weight of water by weight of solids. So we can also calculate what is called as degree of saturation. That means here volume of water by volume of voids. So how much water is filled into the volume voids is called degree of saturation. So when the soil is fully saturated, we'll say degree of saturation is 100%. When the soil is fully dry, it is 0. So similarly, there are other parameters called void ratio. So this is the ratio of volume of the voids to volume of the solids. Similarly, porosity is volume of the voids to the total volume. And dry weight, what we call density, is weight of solids over volume, total volume. So there are several parameters which we will compute and use them in the design. So if you see, for example, a man standing here on a firm ground. So what do we mean by firm ground? So when he stands there, he is neither going to laterally or vertically. Okay. So if a man of about 80 kgs is standing on the shoe may have some footprint of about 300 centimeters square and 80 kgs. So that will give you something like 80 divided by 330. If you give, you will get a pressure of about 0.23 kg per centimeter square. So if you convert that into ton per meter square, it is about 2.3 ton per meter square. So that is the weight that is the pressure is exerted on the soil, and still that man is stable. For example, if you go and stand on a beach, what happens when you stand on the beach when it is dry? You will feel that you are firm, but the moment the water wave comes, and then you see something is scouring off on your feet, and you will slightly go down. Why that is happening means there is some removal of the material. Okay, this you can feel on the seashores. So this is how our buildings are constructed, and they exert some pressure. So under that pressure, if there is no horizontal or vertical movement, so that building is safe. So these are the concepts used for designing of the structures. So before taking up any construction of a structure, so you had to conduct some field and laboratory investigations to get the physical and engineering properties of the soil. Okay, so this interpretation of the data obtained through what we call soil exploration will generally provides information to design which type of foundation, what is the safe load capacity of the foundation, what will be the settlement of the foundation, where is the groundwater level, and what is the causes of the settlements, tilts, cracks existing in the existing structures, and identification of the solutions for different excavation problems. So for all these, we need to know complete soil exploration, and then there are different types of exploration methods. Like you can make an open pit and then see what type of soil it is, collect some disturbed samples, undisturbed samples, and do different types of tests in the lab. But there are some field methods. Like in the field methods, we have what we call standard penetration test. So here, basically, you drill a hole in the ground, and then there is a cone or a cup and tube. Different types of cones, cups, tubes are there. And on that, we will drop a weight on weight over a certain height. So we will count number of the such blows given to that soil and how much penetration it has got. Okay, so these type of tests will conduct, and we will get what is called as N, the SPTN value. And that SPTN value is used to calculate some engineering parameters and then design the structures. So here you can see this tube is pushed into the ground, and we have collected a sample. So you can extract this sample and conduct some field tests, lab tests in the lab. So how many such bore should be made in the ground before you actually start construction? So that depends on the type of the buildings and the type of the strata. So if the strata is uniform, you can take at certain level. If the strata is average or if it is erratic, then you may have to go for more bores. So this is the spacing at which you have to take. Suppose you have only one site and of some size. Let us say you have some 160-yard site or one bore, and then you collect samples in one place with respect to depth, and how much depth you have to go is discussed here further. So depending on if it is isolated spread footing or a raft footing, 1.5 times the width of the foundation. And if adjacent footings clear spacing less than twice the width, then 1.5 times the length of the footing. And if it is pile or well foundation, 1.5 times the width of the structure at the bearing level. Like that, there are several guidelines. What should be the depth and how many bore well, how many bore you have to make, and how many samples you have to collect. So then once you make a bore and then you collect samples at different spaces, different depths, then you can see what type of soil it is physically and then write down here and make what we call as field log. So here if you see red sandy clayey sand, then whitish yellow, completely white medium density sand with mica, then white disintegrated rock. Then whenever you encounter the hard rock, then you will terminate the bore there. Okay. And then here we have conducted different types of tests. One is the standard penetration test, and what is the N value is written here. And at different depths, we have collected undisturbed sample. So strictly speaking, it's not totally undisturbed, but what we call sample with least disturbance. So this undisturbed sample is used to conduct lab tests, and SPT values are the field values. So then by doing this bore at different locations and then with the field logs, we'll try to kind of get a picture of the ground, how it looks like. So now if I go from borehole 1 to borehole 2, so we can see by what are the different types of clay layers. So this is the clay layer we can mark here, reddish clay sand, white silty sand, and then white disintegrated rock like this. So now we have complete idea of the ground beneath the foundation. Then depending on the type of the N value we got, so we can classify soils into different classification. Like if it is clays, we can classify this as, if it is from 0 to 2 N value, very soft to, if it is greater than 30 as hard. So the visual identification is, if it is very soft, your thumb can penetrate up to 25 mm, and soft 25 mm. Then medium, your thumb penetrates with moderate effort. So if it is stiff, your thumb will indent about 8 mm. If it is very stiff, uh, can indent with thumbnail, not with the thumb. If it is hard, you cannot even indent with the nail. So that is the feel you can get when you do check in the ground. Then similarly, in case of a granular soil, that means which is basically sandy soil. So there depending on the n value, we say what is called as relative density. So relative density is defined as from its densest state to loosest state possible. So here we classify it as very loose to medium to dense to very dense. Then once we collect some field samples, we can go to the lab and then do some gradation using those sieves. And then we will get a curve like this. So if this curve is in the form of a S shape, so then we say it is well graded. So if it is straight, no vertical, then we say it poorly graded, meaning all different types of sizes are not presented. So if all different sizes are presented, then it will fill all the voids completely. Okay, then this is about the dry gradation. But when the soil is in the ground, it will have certain water content. So what we call is different water contents. So we liquid limit means the water content at which the soil is about to flow. That is the one. So the plastic limit is the between semi-solid and the plastic state. And we have one more limit called shrinkage limit between solid and semi-solid. So shrinkage limit is the limit at which the water content in the soil, the further reduction in water content will not shrink. Okay, that's why we call it a shrinkage limit. So once you know these proportions of silt, clay, sand, then we can classify the soil under different categories here. That is called clay, silty loam, sandy, silty loam, like that. So these are the various classifications given to the soil. Now, there are two important things. One is called compaction, other is called consolidation. So in the compaction meaning, now we have seen that soil is a three-phase material where we have solids, water, and air. So in compaction, we will remove the air, expulsion of air. So it is an instantaneous process and it will lead to elastic settlements. Okay. So this is basically done by compaction using rollers. So we have different types of rollers. So ordinary rollers and then vibratory type rollers and sheep foot rollers. So in these type of rolling, what we do is we compact the soil such a way that air is expelled. And then if you see here loose soil, you see a lot of air gaps in between. In a compacted soil, you see the air gaps have come down. So how do we know how much we can compact is done by using a test called Proctor test in the laboratory. So where we make a plot of water content versus dry unit weight by mixing the water at different proportions, then we'll get a curve like this. So from this curve, we can get what is the maximum density we can achieve and at particular water content, that is called as optimum moisture content. So this depends upon the type of the effort we give in. So in standard Proctor, it is a standard rammer of certain height and certain weight and number of blows. So if you increase number of blows, then we call it as modified Proctor. So by giving more effort, we can compact it to more, and so that we'll have higher density. So next thing is consolidation. Consolidation is basically a process where we expel water out of the sample, particularly in saturated samples. That means where there are no air voids in the sample. So here what we do is we collect a water sample, soil sample from the field, undisturbed sample, and then put it in this odometer. This is called odometer or 1D consolidometer. So then here we will fill this with water. So if there are any air voids that will get filled by water, then we'll start applying load in increments. So as we apply the load incrementally, so there will be settlements. So this we plot, we call it as a void ratio versus pressure curve. So this here in the pressure, it is in log scale. So we get a curve like this. So again, if you unload it, it will go back to certain level. Okay. But it is not being totally elastic. It will have certain plastic settlements. Then again, when you load, you will get curve like this. And when you unload, you will get a curve like this. So once you have this E log P plots, so the slope of that in that particular pressure range give you what is the deformation taking place under that pressure. Okay, so this slope is called as coefficient of consolidation. So this coefficient of consolidation we will use in calculating the settlements. And now here we have calculated settlements, but how much time that settlement takes place? If you apply a load on the ground, then depending on the load, so there will be settlements, but the settlements will take some time, okay? Because this is a process of consolidation where the settlements will depend upon permeability, the water, how much it can permeate from the soil. So it depends on that. So for that, what we do is there are several methods like one root T method and log T method. So whenever we made an increment, so we will take readings instantaneously at a different times here. Then we make a plot of this, and then using these values here, we can calculate how much time the structure will take to for fully consolidation, and what is the settlements we are going to get at different times also we can calculate. That is the very idea of this test. So using this type of plots, we can calculate the delta H is the settlement here. So it is a function of coefficient of consolidation, the slope of this line, and then what is the height of the, in this case, it is a sample, but in the field, when you want to do it, you will check with respect to the clay layer thickness. And then here we have sigma V naught and delta sigma. So delta sigma dash V naught is the pressure at different levels of the ground, and this delta sigma dash is the additional pressure because of the structure. So if you see here carefully, this sigma V naught will increase as you go down into the ground, but whereas the delta sigma dash, which is the pressure due to the structure, it will decrease. You have higher pressure close to the ground. As you go deeper, it will reduce. So accordingly, your settlements will be higher at the close to the ground surface. As you go down, those settlements will decrease. So these are the various curves we draw and then calculate the settlements. So the soil is basically classified as normally consolidated clay and over consolidated clay, meaning here the soil has a, what we call it will the history. If the soil is undergone higher pressure earlier and now that pressure is not there, so that way we could call it as over consolidated clay. So the soil can has memory. So that memory we can find out using this type of test, where we can find out what is the pre-consolidation pressure. Depending on the pre-consolidation pressure, we can estimate and say whether the soil is normally consolidated or over consolidated. So basically the behavior depends upon whether it is normally consolidated or over consolidated. So this normally consolidated, over consolidated, we can relate with the loose sand and dense sand. Okay. So the properties of these two will be almost similar, but we have to identify in it is in which condition at the present. So then once you know that, for example, here you have three different layers. Here, this is a layer of sand, and is a layer of clay, and another layer of clay, which has different parameters and different properties. So once your water table is here, now you are at the ground level. So depending on at what depth you are going to propose your foundation, you can calculate what is the stress. So here we have two terms called as total stress and effective stress. So basically when water table is there, then you have the hydrostatic pressure of the water and total pressure, and then the total pressure minus pore water pressure is, we call it as effective stress. Actually this effective stress is responsible for settlements. Okay, so that's why we calculate always effective stress, which is designated as sigma dash here. So now here we can calculate the settlements in the system up to the zone of the interest. Like if your width of the foundation is B, then we have to go deep, depth equal to 2 times the width of the footing, 2B, then calculate settlements in different layers. So these layers settlements we can calculate using these two formulae, depending on whether it is a normally consolidated or over consolidated soil. And we can also calculate how much time it takes for to attain that settlements. So we calculate the settlement, and then we can calculate the time, how much time it takes for that settlement also we can calculate using this formula here, depending on the percentage of the consolidation achieved. So for 0 to 60% you have one formula, and beyond 60% consolidation you have another formula. So now for this consolidation to be complete or to estimate settlements, here the key parameter is how much water can flow through the soil, that we call it as permeability. So this permeability can be estimated by in the lab or in the field In the lab, basically, we use two types of methods. One is constant head permeability and variable head permeability. Constant head permeability is used for fine grained soils, and variable head permeability for constant head for coarse grained soils, and variable for the fine grained soils. So basically, this permeability is measured in terms of units of velocity. So if you see here, if it is medium to coarse gravel, it is 10 to the power of -1. That means 0.1 centimeters per second. But if you go to clays, it will be in the order of 10 to the power of 7 or less. Okay. So here you can see, if the void sizes are more, the flow will be higher. But if the voids are very close, that means their voids are very small. So that can happen only if the void ratio is very less. So here in the dense soil, the movement of the water will be very slow. Like in clays, the particles are very close to each other. The particle being smaller in size, they are packed very closely. Then the water flow will be very less. So this factor affects in the process of consolidation. Of course, there are some field methods also to ascertain this permeability, like we have pump in, pump out test. So what we make is we make a bore in the ground and then start pumping out the water, and then see how much time it takes to drop down these water levels. We can calculate and then estimate what is the kind of permeability in this. Then now other thing what we have to find out is the shear strength of the soil. So the shear strength of the soil, there are various methods. So we collect undisturbed samples, and this is the direct shear test, where we can, of course, here we don't have full control on the pore water pressure, but we can do a simple test which is very fast. So here we place the soil sample, we apply some normal force, and then we shear it with a horizontal force, and then get graphs like this, where it is the horizontal displacement versus shear stress. Shear stress is basically the load applied divided by the area of cross section. So here we identify the different type peaks in these under different normal forces, and then make a plot like this. This is called Mohr Coulomb envelope, where we get parameters C and phi. C is the cohesion and phi is the angle of internal friction. So these two parameters are used to estimate the safe bearing pressure. So the shear behavior is like this. If it is a loose sand, so you have a stress strain curve like this. But if it is a dense, you may have a peak, and then finally it comes to the residual strength, which is almost close to the loose one. So this we call as the ultimate stress. Okay, this is the peak stress. So, and there is another type of test what we call as a triaxial test. So in the triaxial test, the sample is in the form of a cylinder. So that sample is placed here, and then there is a rubber membrane here, and then there is a cover here. In this, we'll fill with water and apply different cell pressure here. So this application of different cell pressure is like, if I have taken a sample at a depth of 2 meters from the ground, so there is already some overburden pressure. So that overburden pressure I will create here. And then because of the construction, there is additional pressure on the structure that I will apply through this piston, what we call as a Dieveatric stress. So under these conditions, Dieveatric stress, then we will see when this sample is going to fail. So this how we will test and then get parameters like again C5. So we have a plots like this, and then we will estimate what is the C and phi here using this triaxial test under different conditions. So these C5 parameters are used to design foundations. So if you see the stress strain behavior, it looks like this. So dense sand and OC clay will have a stress strain behavior with a peak here, whereas loose sand and NC clay will have a behavior like this without any peak here. So now you are going to construct a structure that should not fail in shear, and it should not have undue settlements. So there are basically two criteria. One is the shear failure criteria, other is the settlement criteria. So shear failure criteria, if you see, there are three possible modes of failure. One is we call as general shear failure, where you can see in the load displacement curve, there is a peak. And other is called local shear failure, where there is no peak. And other is called punching shear failure, where again here there is no peak. But when there is no peak, we will consider the load at a particular settlement. Okay. Now, when you come to settlement, here a structures can undergo uniform settlement, okay, like this. If undergoes uniform settlement, there is no disintegration in the structure, but there will be settlement. Because of the settlement, if you have any service connection, that may have some problem if that exceeds some limit. And there could be settlements like this uneven. So when there is uneven settlement, building may topple or tipple, okay, but there may not be any cracks. But if there is what we call differential settlement, if the settlement is different from one end to the other end of the structure, that will lead to cracks in the structure. Okay, so now it is important to restrict the uniform settlement to some level so that service connections are not hampered. And then we should ensure that there is no differential settlement so that building won't crack. Okay, so these are the two basic criteria for which we have to design the structures. So basically, which type of foundations we'll adopt? We have different types of foundations. If it is a load bearing structure, you have a footing like this. Okay, and if it is a framed structure, then you have isolated footings like this, and you may have combined footings. If the individual footings are close to each other, then you will go for combined footings. But if the soil bearing capacity is not adequate, then you may go for raft like this. So these are all comes under shallow footings. And then if you are shallow, if you don't have enough bearing capacity at shallow ground, shallow depths, then you will go for deep footings like this piles. So you have piles which go get into soil of high bearing strength. Then you may have a pile cap and construct a structure. But generally for buildings, so for normal buildings, we'll go for shallow foundations. For high-rise structures, we may have to go for deep type of deep foundations. But what will happen if even at higher level, higher depths, if you don't encounter firm strata, then you have to go for some soil, what we call a ground improvement techniques like this. Here it's a vibro replacement process where you make a hole in the ground and then fill with granular material and then compact it and then construct on that. So there are several different types of ground improvement techniques. There are chemical based ground improvement techniques, mechanical based, and these days we have a lot of geosynthetics. Using that geogrids and geo textiles, we can improve the strength of the ground. Okay, so now here you can see some structures. So this is basically a silos which store the grains. So if you see, the structure is very strong even if the ground is weak. So it has tilted to one side but the structure is intact. So here the structure is well designed, but in spite of ground variations, it has tilted but nothing happened to the structure. And here this is a leaning tower of Pisa. So there is some inclination, but structure is intact. But at times, what happens when there are differential settlements, some structures will undergo cracks like this. Okay, so if these cracks are of a higher magnitude, then the building may not become livable. So then you have to do something. Okay, so here also you can see some cracks. So if the crack is very minor like this here, you can repair it, and after some time it may settle, and further degradation not happen. But these type of structures, notwithstanding their own weight, there can be other loads like earthquake load here. So because of the earthquake, you can see some structures collapsed. Some are staying perfectly, but some have collapsed. So that's how we have to design the structures even for loads considering earthquake loading, wind loading. Even nowadays, no people are incorporating even loads due to tsunamis. So recently there was tsunami, in east coast of India. So similarly, people are considering different types of loads, and if you design all the things perfectly, your structures will be okay. Okay, so this is where the importance of geotechnical engineering lies. Now here I'll show you one small video. So to mention that no, this soil mechanics is not recent concept; it is there from time immemorial. You can just have this video.
शाश्वतं सुन्दरं वास्तु उपयुक्त च तद्भवेत् शरीरं साधनं धर्म वास्तुक्षेमं स्वयंत्रकम्.
Our ancient texts, the Vedas and the Mahabharata, have documented details of what we now know as soil mechanics and foundation engineering practices. age-old dots written between 500 BC and 1100 AD possess a wealth of information. For instance, Samrang Sutradhara, written by Bhojdev, describes the methods of ground testing that were then employed. If a pit refilled by the excavated soil is underfilled, the soil is inferior. But if some soil remains outside, the soil quality is excellent. To test permeability, fill a pit with water, walk away 100 steps and return. If the height of the water is maintained, the soil is very good. The more the water seeps through, the less desirable is the soil quality. The suitability of the soil was also gauged by hitting the ground with a special rod and listening to its sound, or even evaluating it on the basis of taste and smell. The soil would be compacted with the help of animals, ranging from elephants to sheep, a precursor perhaps to today's sheep's foot roller. Our forefathers built their temples on elevated ground to protect the foundations from the water table. The depth of the foundation usually varied between half to full width of the structure, or it was kept to the depth of the water table. For single-storied houses, the foundation was as deep as 1/4 of a man's height, and for multi-storied buildings, it was equivalent to a man's full height. For us today, these details may seem like odd thumb rules to follow, yet their effectiveness finds testimony in the over 15,000 ancient monuments charting the length and breadth of this vast land. Temples, Buddhist stupas, mosques, towers, rock-cut caves, some dating back 1,000 years or more. Let us
Thank you, Raghu.
Yeah. So if you have any questions, hope I have finished in
Do you
time.
have any question?
No questions. It is remembering my college days, what we have studied. Yes, exactly. Those days, the geotechnical was not the term we have used, soil mechanics and foundation engineering. Hats off to you, sir.
Mechanics and
Because,
foundation engineering,
yes,
right.
because it is a vast subject. So we remember all those things, this Proctor density, the flux, and the liquid limit, solid limit,
Yeah.
shrinkage limit, everything I remember. Still, it is in my memory. And we used to do graphs and all.
Yeah.
And Proctor density also we used to
Yeah.
do in the labs and all. So it is, I gone back to 30 years back and remember all these things, whatever you have explained. It is a superb presentation because it is a vast subject. We learned this is the
Yeah.
soil mechanics in 3rd year engineering and foundation engineering in 4th year, that is a final year engineering. All this gist he has brought into the
Yeah.
just 40-45 minutes of presentation.
Exactly. Yeah.
It is a vast subject, really. It is a, you cannot even liquid limit, shrinkage limit, and the plastic limit. It is more than 3 hours. The number of illustrations and all can be explained. But is a layman, even layman also not a technical person. Layman also can understood why foundation is important. What are the classification of foundation and what are the types of the soils? All these things he brought out in a systematic manner. So that is the reason why we should go for the professionals. Even structural engineers also require. So the SPC, basically, who is going to give the SPC? This geotechnical person is going to give the SPC for the structural engineer. On the basis of SPC, only the structural engineer can design. So it is a wonderful presentation, sir. So it is wholeheartedly, I'm congratulating you, sir. The depth of knowledge. It is all the what we call refurnishing, and it is no words. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a wonderful presentation. So much to we've learned so much in such a short span for people who are not exposed to this kind of things, and but still a part of the construction industry. I think it is an amazing opportunity for us to get exposed to, such kind of knowledge. Thank you so much.
Excellent coverage, sir, Raghu Garu. So it's totally
Thank you,
covered
thank you.
from fundamentals to the
Yeah,
from
yeah.
soil mechanics concepts to
So I expect all structural
foundation.
engineers
So
to
it's
please
excellent.
consult some geotechnical engineering before you start
Yeah, it's
construction.
almost 2 years subject is covered in 40 minutes. So
Yeah,
really
yeah.
interesting. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
That is the difference,
you.
professors and professionals.
Yes.
They can teach 100 hours, they can teach 1 hour, the same subject.
Yes.
True.
That I know him since 1993. We are friends since 1993. So he is in the IISc Bangalore since 1989. So I want to just introduce to our team to know, but only the bad, our people registered, but they didn't join due to some reasons, I don't know. But whoever is there, I really enjoyed that. But one thing I saw here, he gave the video lastly, that exactly the Vastu science, Samarangana Sutradhar. I gone through total book,
That must be
Samarangana
very
Sutradhar.
interesting to Venu.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah, I have that book, Samarangana Sutradhar. They follow that exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
When you construct that, you do that actually.
Yeah.
Even such a, like I can sit on the floor, I can tell about what is inside. I can sleep on the floor, put
Yeah.
my ears on the floor, I can hear the sounds where I can reach
Yeah.
that, how the soil is there inside. That is there in the Samarangana Sutradhar. It is same thing you are using in the technical
Yeah.
way. Earlier, Rishis used that way.
Yes.
That
Yes.
we do that. As a Vastu consultant, I do that actually.
Sir, are you sharing this PPT with us?
Yeah. But those days they had option to select a site, but now you can't.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat, Raghu?
No, those days they used to test the soil that way, what Rishi has shown,
Right.
and go to a place where they can get such place to construct. But
Yeah.
now you don't have such choice, no.
Yes.
So wherever you want, you have to create that conditions and construct the building. That's
Right.
the difference.
Right.
Sir, are you sharing the PPT with us?
I don't know, Raghu, that limit, I don't know his limitation about the PPT.
And why foundation is required, what type of soils it is suitable. It is all basic fundamental things. So much it is a bridge, it is different. For abutments, it is different. Underground water, it is different. Even for the runways, it is different. All big, it is a big science. It is nothing but a science. So much advanced. That is why civil engineering is a vast syllabus and it is a very interesting syllabus. So that is why we have so many experts. Geophysical, structural engineer, and bridge engineering, airport engineering, everything. It is all railway engineering, tunnel engineering, like that. So much vast syllabus. And hats off to you, sir, once again. That is why they are all pillars of our what we call engineering. We have to utilize them properly, take the professional services and each and every structure. So that structure is going to be a long lasting with the hassle-free and peaceful of mind. We can aram se relax in our respective structures. So this is what I want to say.
Thank you.